those in the live stream, we're in Austin, Texas. It certainly feels like the beginning of the summer. Speaking of Texas and Texans, I'm going to invite none other than Roger Dooley, contributor to Forbes, coming up. Roger, I'm going to hand you big round of applause for Roger Dooley to joining us. Fan favorite. Got to read his writing. He's a lot of nerds as well, just like Eric Christopher. A lot of nerds reading your column. Maybe some geeks too. Now that we define that, courtesy of Ann Ward to open that last panel. Thank you, Ann. So Roger, I'm going to hand this over to you, but I'm going to really quickly invite up as a courtesy to we'll do an American style. I'll invite up as the MC our panelists, but Miles Paschini, FE Bank. Big round of applause for Miles Paschini, FE Bank, part of very involved in Polygon's ecosystem. A lot of us at Grit Daily and the Grit Daily House know a lot of what Polygon's up to. Stefan Rust, the one and only, coming up. Stefan, big round of applause for Stefan Rust. And last but not least, the wonderful Caitlin Long, Custodia Bank, coming up. Caitlin, big round of applause for Caitlin Long for joining us here today. She'll also be on the main stage during Consensus at the Convention Center. And I can take your bag off. Okay. And I'm going to hand you this mic, Caitlin. And Roger, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you.
Will do. Thanks, Jordan. And I think we've been kind of sandbagged by the title of this, which is Where to Find Alpha in 2022, which probably a little more challenging in 2022 than perhaps it has been. I guess, does anybody really want to jump in with any insights? We're in such a weird time. Last time I checked today, the Dow is down 800 points. Bitcoin's below 30,000, of course. And where do we start looking for alpha?
That's a deep dive. And then we got inflation at 8.5% according to BLS, right. And Trueflation says 10.7%. Look, this is when alpha is created. And I think we need to keep an eye out where it's being developed. How do we identify where it's being developed? And there are multiple different sources in the community. If you're looking in Web3 for alpha, right? There might be other areas where alpha is created as well, maybe on the physical traditional stock markets. And I think traditionally in harder times, it's going to be in the more necessity areas, right? What do we really need? Do we really need a second Netflix subscription or Amazon Plus subscription, or can we do with something else? So I don't know. That's maybe I have a panelist have something else to say.
Caitlin, you have any thoughts to add to that?
It's interesting because I first of all, I don't give investment advice, but I also think that
none of this is investment advice. We can put in that disclaimer.
I've said for years, price is the least interesting aspect of the Bitcoin world. And we're in crypto winter, actually. A lot of really good things happen during crypto winter. This is when a lot of building gets done and a lot of the cruft in the industry gets flushed out. And unfortunately, innocent people get caught by that. I understand that, and that's tragic. But boy, a lot of people learn a lot of lessons, and I bought into the top of the Bitcoin bubble, if you will, of the first cycle back in 2012 through 2014, and sat with losses on my Bitcoin for a while and stuck it out. And there will be a lot of people who have to do the same this time around, but every 4 years it all reloads because there's a natural cycle here due to the halving cycle. We're 2 years away from a halving, and this is a normal cycle. Those of us who've been around it have seen it before. And for the new folks that just got in, stick it out.
Mm-hmm. Is that what translates into fundamentals for something like Bitcoin? In other words, stocks have fundamentals. They have an earnings stream. Obviously, there's expectations about the future that people can't predict, but it seems like many of the various commodities in this space don't have fundamentals, but I guess the halving process and the limits on production and so on would translate into a fundamental. Would that be correct?
Sure, absolutely. And it's not that different than other fundamental analysis for commodities.
Mm-hmm. But I think that applies specifically to Bitcoin, right? Where you have the limitations. Other coins don't necessarily have that limitation. And their fundamentals will apply, but those fundamentals are slightly different. They are developer related, they're activity, engagement related, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna anti-answer the question. I think that seeking alpha is typically we're looking for eking out something better from somebody else, and I think this survival is where we're going to find alpha, right? So I mean I don't mean that in a very negative way, but I think this is a time where like some people give up, some people quit, some people say, I think somebody said in the prior panel, I'm going to hang my hat up, it's over with. I think the alpha is going to be those who figure out how to survive properly in this, like focus, stay out of the regulatory fray. There's a lot of areas where those companies who pay attention to what they're doing, or those projects, those are going to be the ones that are going to incrementally survive better than the other ones.
Mm-hmm. I think at this point in the market, the vast majority of people don't really understand what's going on at this conference. They aren't participating in any of the markets. Yesterday, I was here for a little while and talked to two separate startups, both of whom in different ways said that their mission was to make some of these things accessible to normal people, by which they weren't necessarily highly technical, weren't an early adopter that really was highly motivated to figure stuff out, and so on. Let's start with you, Miles. How important is that sort of simplification of this whole space?
Well, I mean, the key is when adoption comes, we won't know it because we'll just take it for granted, right? And so that's really the state that we need to get to. And as developers and creators, even that, running a bank, we're trying to figure out how do we make things more frictionless. And even doing those at the institutional level, or doing them, even at the client level, changing the way that someone deposits an asset. And so I think it's, there's thousands of things that we need to do, but it's super important. There's not going to be a watershed event of all of a sudden this crypto thing is easy for everybody and your grandmother can adopt it. It's going to be thousands of little tweaks that those of us that are developing do, and then eventually we're just going to take it for granted like we do our cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I first got into Bitcoin, we were a tiny community. Every time we've had a crash or we've had a downfall, we've gone through it's a very volatile market. It's grown each time. Every expansion has resulted in new immigrants entering into the crypto landscape and the Web3 world. And we're now, I'd say, in a DeFi world, or people living really in decentralized land, we're about 20 million strong. And that's really a tiny part of the population. Overall, worldwide, maybe 500 million people actually have, in some form or fashion, some kind of Web3 asset, some token, in whatever form that might be. So we've got a long way to go. But then again, I don't think we need to market to everybody, because I don't think that that's where the growth's going to come from. Certain people are not going to want to ever come into this asset class or be a part of Web3. They'll always be negative about it, and so we don't need to worry about that. But what we do need to do is build a much better user experience than we have today. Mm-hmm. We need to have a user experience that is intuitive. We need to have talent enter into the industry to bring us a user experience, given the complexity that we are dealing with in a decentralized network, with the code base that is very has a lot of room for improvement, with a tooling that is still immature. And those are areas that we all need to invest in to really bring a perfect user experience that will allow the community to then adopt it and have a greater community in it in totality.
I might be a little more optimistic. I recall in the early days of e-commerce, talking to a lot of managers who said, yeah, e-commerce is good, but our customers are never going to want to buy online. And then a whole host of companies led by Amazon simplified that process to the point where it's one click and everybody buys online now. Custodia's mission, Caitlin, is in part to bring this to the masses, right? Or is that incorrect?
Yeah, so our future customers are intended to be only businesses, so not consumers. But one of the things that has surprised me the most after having gotten our charter in October 2020, and of course we're not operating yet, but we're getting close. One of the things that has surprised me the most is how many fintechs and non-crypto companies are interested in our services, because there are so few tech-forward banks in the United States. And because we come from an engineering ethos, that is something that has been significant and is viewed as significant. So even though the fintech world is it may or may not be interested in crypto, it's even the parts of the world that are not interested in crypto that are interested in us, and that's the biggest surprise so far.
How important is regulation? Because I write about friction, and regulation can add friction, but also anarchy can add friction too. You've had some regulatory challenges.
Yes.
Where do you fall on that spectrum?
You know, it's so interesting. On the panel yesterday, we had a great debate because they curated the panel to have three people who deliberately disagreed with each other. Each of us pretty much agreed with half of what the other was saying, which meant that all three of us had significant areas of disagreement. And one of the most interesting exchanges was when Dante Disparte, who's a longtime friend, and he talked about how Circle just doesn't ask for permission and just goes. And I chimed in and said, we asked for permission. And his response is, where did that get you? And look where we are. So, look, I mean, that's a challenge, right? Because the regulators are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They want us to get regulated, and those of us who try have not broken through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also I think the regulatory environment is going through a set of challenges on their side as well. You've got two different offices that are trying to compete against each other to own and govern and regulate Web3. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm trying to constantly remind myself I have to call it Web3 now. But yeah.
You don't have to.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, so they want to get crypto. They want to have a control over crypto. You got the SEC on the one hand. You have the CFTC on the other hand. Yeah.
I think your question about will regulation help or not help. In our business, I see many people who would be interested in entering the market that have some kind of a fiduciary responsibility. And if the choices they have today, if I'm going to invest company funds or endowment funds or something into crypto, am I going to do that in like this unlicensed DeFi protocol? They probably can't make that step right now. So having those types of products inside of a bank where they can lower the risk associated with their fiduciary decisions, I think that's going to make a big difference. And so we need to get all of the value that's coming out of crypto in great things like DeFi protocols generating yield. Let's get those into the financial institutions where a lot more people can enter that would be afraid, frankly, they are afraid to enter. And so we see that as a huge opportunity, as saying, hey, this is really good technology. It's evolved a lot, but now let's put it into an environment where more people who have a responsibility over those funds can invest.
Mm-hmm. How far away are we from a digital dollar?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because the Fed has had Custodia's business plan for a digital dollar issued by a bank for now more than 2 years, 2 years and 1 month. And you see what the situation is. And for those of you who don't know, we filed suit against the Fed on Tuesday.
Why did you? Can you share? What did you? How did you file? I don't want that.
Well,
that's interesting.
We applied. We got our charter in. I'll stick to the facts. Obviously, I can't speak to the lawsuit, but I'll stick to the facts. We applied. We got our charter in our bank charter, full-fledged bank charter onshore in the United States, not in Puerto Rico, in October 2020. Applied for our Fed master account, which is a bank account that only banks can have at the Fed, specifically only depository institutions can have at the Fed, in October 2020. And then we also went so far as to apply to become a Fed member bank. We're the only novel bank that has ever done that. There are other novel banks who have gotten master accounts from the Fed, but none of them ever became member banks. What does that mean? It means that we've applied to become directly regulated by the Fed. So to put the puzzle pieces together, we've been waiting for an answer from the Fed for 19 months. We did literally everything right, up the middle of the fairway. The state of Wyoming, going back to 2018, worked with the Federal Reserve. Senator Lummis disclosed they had more than 100 meetings with the Federal Reserve to create this new type of bank charter that would service this industry. And here we are 4 years later, and we're getting the Heisman. So I candidly, when you talk about the digital dollar, the Federal Reserve has had the opportunity to greenlight that. This was not done in a vacuum. It was a 4-year process in the making between the new type of charter, the rules that were put out for public comment twice. There's a 752-page supervisory exam manual for these new type of bank charters that was done in conjunction with Promontory, which is one of the big bank consulting firms. Okay, and then the first ones get chartered and knock on the door, and then halt. And that's what happened. So to specifically answer your question, a bank-issued digital dollar could have already been out there had the Federal Reserve green-lighted it. This has been on their in their inbox in a manner in which they are absolutely familiar, because this is a 4-year long consultative process that has preceded that application. Okay, and I will be blunt and say that some of the fraud and scams that have happened in stablecoins would have been prevented had bank regulators made a decision faster.
That sounded like your good opening statement.
But I think that, I mean, how expensive was that, right? And how the barriers to entry to get into the banking space are just so prohibitive pursuing that round, right? I mean, it's just really challenging for anybody to do that.
And yet they say they want us to all get regulated. Someone goes right up the middle of the fairway and complies with every single rule and tries to get regulated, and you see where it stands.
Right. Well, the first paper currencies were issued by banks, right? So why not the first digital currency? Is Puerto Rico a significant location for legal reasons?
I mean, we did a market study in 2017, spent time and money and effort to look at jurisdictions around the world, looked in Europe, looked in the U.S., and we just chose Puerto Rico because there was many advantages to being there. Number one is the regulator gave us a charter. We're in a similar situation, but not the same. Like, we've applied for our Fed account, and it's taking its sweet time. But you know, we haven't sued the Fed, so but you know, we're fully operating. We're regulated. We're just taking a different approach to making it happen. But you know, there's tax advantages of being in Puerto Rico. There's what I call the Venn diagram of services. So we belong to Visa Latin American Caribbean as a principal issuer. If we belong to Visa Inc., we would have different rules we'd have to apply to. So there's a lot of interesting benefits. Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth of the United States, so all federal regulations regards to BSA, AML, KYC, all the regs that you want to line up, they all apply to us, right? So it has not been a barrier. It's actually been a benefit to our business so far.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, you've operated and continue to operate around the globe. What countries seem to be doing a better job, do you think, than the U.S., if any? Like, where are the hotspots that are hotspots in a positive way?
I mean, I was surprised. I moved here from Hong Kong, Asia. China's definitely not doing it right, or has got its own way of doing it. And a lot of the entrepreneurs, the Chinese entrepreneurs, have left offshore. Dubai is definitely an attractive hub for all things crypto at the moment right now. But these vary, right? They change based on the flavor of the month and within the framework that they're happy with, right? But I do think that what amazed me when I moved here was the fact that I couldn't access half the DeFi services that I was so used to. And all of that innovation is happening away offshore. And that innovation is where jobs are created, where that wealth is created, where value is added and contributed to any economy. And those economies are now moving onto a blockchain specifically, not anymore tied to a physical location. They're all based on Ethereum, based on Algorand, Avalanche, wherever you go, that's where innovation is happening. And if they're not on a physical jurisdiction, on a land, then they're happening globally, decentralized. And I think that's where we're seeing new jobs being created and new wealth being created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so small financial markets are approaching this more aggressively because they're looking for economic development, right? So if you look at Gibraltar, where I was stationed for 10 years, you know, they built a DLT legislation. If you look now, there's a lot of big companies registering there because, you know, they're seeking alpha. They're trying to find that jurisdiction where they can at least have regulatory cover. It may not be a total solution, but, you know, Gibraltar is a good example. I mean, places like Estonia, which I wouldn't say is the best license in the world, but they're making an effort to create a framework to attract economic development. And so, you know, the U.S. should figure that out, that this is an opportunity And I think it's going to take some time. I think we're still looking at another year or two minimum until we see some real regulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like Estonia has been an innovator in a lot of digital stuff. I mean, it helps when you're small and nimble, I suppose, and can move quickly. And Wyoming, too, is kind of an interesting choice. It would not have been the most logical high-tech state choice, but obviously it's been fruitful for your company.
Well, related to what we were just talking about, there's not a large banking industry in the state of Wyoming. And so to the extent that the banking industry has a, shall we say, influence over the regulatory process, it didn't exist in Wyoming. And it was a bipartisan effort, and most of especially the early bills, especially the ones related to the new bank charter, passed with a veto-proof majority. And the banking industry, of course, opposed it. In fact, they called me a terrorist in an open legislative committee. And this was 2018. It was January 2018. So think about that, right? We'd just come through the previous bubble, and so the ethos of the perception out there among the mainstream was that we were all kind of what the internet was in the early 90s, right? Drug dealers and porn and gamblers and any sort of dark web concept, right? And so they slapped me with the terrorist label, and I just laughed. But they weren't able to get it killed in Wyoming, and that makes a big difference. To your point, Wyoming has been very nimble. There are now 29 different laws in 5 legislative sessions that have been passed by the blockchain group in Wyoming, bipartisan. It's actually led by a Democrat right now. It was started by a Republican back then. And the state absolutely has been nimble and very responsive to this industry.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. I think we're just about wrapped up. Miles, you have anything you want to finish with?
I would say that everybody should keep their heads up. I mean, I know we're in this kind of macro down market across the board, but I've been involved with crypto since around 2013, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I mean, walk into this convention and it's like sardine can. So I would say, keep your head up, and the innovation's happening. I mean, I know my team, we're working every single day to make this a better environment, and it's going to change. Web3 will exist in a real way.
Mm-hmm. Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what much to add. We didn't talk too much about alpha here, but
no.
I think, I'll say what I said in my opening statement is really just, alphas will be created out of this environment. And I think we're going to be cleaning out the less quality, and we'll highlight the quality. And I personally am a big proponent of non-custodial services where we use the blockchain as the custody. Because I think we don't need to go through a 4-year navigation that then results in being called a terrorist.
Not your keys, not your coins. The most important lesson I learned, and a lot of folks, unfortunately, probably have to learn that lesson the hard way, just like I did. And I thought about it as cheap tuition back then when I lost money at Mount Gox. Not much, but boy, that was tuition well paid to learn a very important lesson. And hopefully everyone has learned it before they lose money this time.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's hear it for our panelists.
Big round of applause. The one and only Roger Dooley, Forbes, Miles Paschini, FV Bank, Stefan Rust, Laguna, and another big round of applause for Caitlin Long from Custodia for joining us.